to your point about partnership from earlier on, to bring in like a lot of the innovations that are occurring in Asia, like I look at the Pacific regions and the things that they're able to do with technology and how they even handle things like COVID. Like they had very like instantaneous scanning mechanisms, it seems, right from the beginning. And just like their, I suppose I'll call it agility to be able to move very quickly and to get things done is quite amazing. So if we can import some of that knowledge, know-how, and methodologies, I think it would be great for us.
Yeah. Well, it's Asia, some of the particularly emerging market countries are able to do that because they often move from a baseline of zero to the latest, whether it's infrastructure or technology or systems. They don't have the legacy systems in between that countries like Canada and America have that take some time to move through to get to what would be the best tools to work with. Great example is Cambodia, which has a bank called National Bank of Canada, or ABA Bank, which National Bank of Canada owns 100%. It's their subsidiary there, and they've developed the payments platform for the country, kind of like Apple Pay, and everybody uses it. So you could go to the little street stall vendor to buy your lunch or your noodles, and the payment will be via phone. And it's pretty amazing to see that in that country. And that's just one example of going from, nothing to everybody's, moved away from using cash, like physical cash, and it's all being done electronically. It's great for the government too, because they know all the cash flows. Small business makes tax easier, makes transacting easier. And you see there's lots of examples of that in emerging market. I think we in Canada and in North America have to realize that innovation takes place everywhere, and we can learn from emerging markets in some of the countries in ASEAN just as much as they can learn from us. Although we tend to be a bit insular sometimes and think innovation can only happen here or in America, but in the reality is it's happening all over the place in different things, and the horizons need to be broadened to look at that.
Yes, and I'm sure the Asian Business Council is definitely bringing some of these case studies forward and informing.
We'll do our best.
No, it's great. Now, when you think about the future in terms of technology or just where we're headed, like what are some prominent trends that you see? Like, what do you think will happen, like, I don't know, 3 years from now in terms of like how our societies will function? Some of the innovations that we'll have.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think some of the biggest things that I see are transformations in and demand for power, right? For energy. Southeast Asia is still largely dependent on coal for its as baseload power supply. They've made commitments to decarbonize. At the same time, their increase in power supply, baseload power supply, is barely keeping up with their natural economic growth rate and demand for power. And then you have another layering coming on of all these new data centers and the requirements that they have for power to run, AI-driven algorithms and that computing power that's required, which is putting a whole other, demand on top of the regular demand. So it's a challenge, right? And how do you do that at the same time removing all that coal from the process of which they've committed to? So there's a lot of thinking about transforming that energy industry. The opportunities for Canada would be one, LNG. We sell our LNG to Asian markets. That's helping to decarbonize because it's removing coal from the grid, and LNG is a much cleaner fuel. And then the other aspect is nuclear power, which Canada is a powerhouse, no pun intended, in nuclear technology, regulations, supply chain, and the ASEAN countries are starting to look at this as an alternative. And my belief is that you will decarbonize without using nuclear power. And so there's a couple of opportunities there for Canadian industry to work with countries in ASEAN, both to address a very sound commercial demand for power, but also to help with their decarbonization efforts going forward into the future. And there's lots of innovation around grid management and size of plant and other things. But that's one example of an area where there's a tremendous amount of change in use of technology.
Yeah, I think to your point, power and energy definitely are the big ones for the future. As I'm sure you know, Gen AI has been everywhere. Everyone's speaking about Gen AI, but the conversation that I don't see occurring as often is, again, what you brought up, and that's all those data centers and how they're powered, particularly when we have all these goals to consume less energy. And so how do you get those two to compute? And I think that is one of the big questions for the future. But I'm personally a fan of nuclear energy. I know that Hollywood has scared a lot of people off of it. But if we look at some of the innovations that are happening in nuclear, like, it's amazing, like how much power that they're able to create, and then with like very little waste. I think it's an amazing piece of technology that is being explored, thankfully, and will definitely be a big part of the future. But who knows, there might be some other innovations that come out that we haven't thought about. So besides energy, like in terms of technology, we know that AI, Gen AI, are going to play large roles. How do you think they'll change business? Or do you think they'll have any large significance on the changes that happen to businesses?
Well, I think if you look at a lot of the technologies, that the core premise is that it improves efficiency to the point where maybe we're all out of work, including you and me and our camera person over here. But that is a challenge because while technology is needed in some ways to improve efficiency, in ASEAN countries, for the most part, you have a young and growing population, and that needs employment to continue to rise into the middle class and increase income. So there's a challenge there between wanting to roll out technologies that make you uber efficient and can operate as lean a team as possible, with the demand that there are a lot of people coming into the labor force, and you want them to be employed, right? Because you want wealth to be generated and spread. So there is a challenge. There's an inherent challenge there in the deployment of technology and some of the other goals that these countries have. Some of the older or aging societies, while using that technology to maximize efficiency, is great because they just don't have the labor, right, that they need. But in others, it's a different focus. So I think of useful technologies as disseminating information to make better decision making, to have things like customs information, duties, very apparent when you're importing or exporting something, where taxes and other things are calculated right away to make that efficient. And then you also reduce any potential for corruption because it's all public and you can't hide. Tools like that are very useful, I think. And for if you're in agribusiness, for farmers being able to how to get their goods to market, how to check what the prices are so they know what they're negotiating, how to manage logistics on goods delivery and supply chain. I mean, all that is very constructive use of technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, it's interesting. You mentioned corruption. Whenever I hear that, the thing that pops into my head is blockchain. Because if all the information is available to the public and it's out there and everything is trackable and there's integrity in the ledger so that things can't be changed or altered, I feel it provides a lot of protection and security. Do you have any thoughts on blockchain and its role?
Sure. Well, I am not typically that involved in the crypto sort of world, just to preface, but on blockchain, there are quite a number of folks looking at that general ledger system and trying to apply it to their businesses, like export-import, where you are right, it provides an unchangeable mechanism to trace a transaction or ownership or transfer of a good or a service. And I know there are a few folks working to apply that to trade finance transactions. And I think that would be a very, good thing. It's still early days in many cases, but that is a very useful set of technology for the purposes that you describe. And there are numerous people working on that in these types of applications.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to track some of the progress in blockchain, because it's been used for different things, like in different geographies. Switzerland, for instance, was trying to use it for different regulatory purposes and also for like OTC trades, which I thought was fascinating. I'm not sure how far along they've gotten. I'll have to go and take a look, but they were doing some very interesting experiments and case studies with blockchain that I thought were very cool. We've sort of spoken about technology. I did want to also speak with you about SPACs or SPACs, special vehicles they're essentially like shell companies, but I mean, can you speak to them and I suppose in what capacity you may use it in the future or if you have in the past, and what you feel their purpose is in the market?
Sure. Well, as you know, there was quite a flurry of activity in SPACs a while ago now, which has fallen off, and it was simply a tool to as a vehicle to raise money, as you said, without as an alternative to raising a fund or doing other types of mechanisms in the market. And they were quite popular for a while, and they're still out there. They've had a couple of cycles of ebbing and flowing. A lot of technology funds were using them, for example. And there are different SPAC regulations in different jurisdictions. Hong Kong has one, Singapore has one. I think probably every market has some type of a SPAC structure. The challenge is for them that while you raise a SPAC and you have initial investors, when you bring the transaction to that, your investors may or may not stay, and you do need to often recycle them. And there's different investors at different set of the curves, so it can be challenging. I think the performance, obviously, of some of the companies that went into SPACs has been really variable. Some of them had tremendously huge valuations, which then crashed to some cases almost nothing. Others have been bouncing along. So I think it's not the be all and end all. I think it's just another financing tool that investors can use to do projects, and you would need to assess whether what's best for you, whether it's a private route, a SPAC route, or more standard IPO route, based on the type of company you have and type of capital you're looking for, and your time horizons and that sort of thing.
Yeah, they were very, very popular during the pandemic, and yeah, they were I don't know, they were very interesting because there were some of the meme stock groups that picked up a few of them, which was fascinating because they and they were very affordable because they all started at a base of $10 a unit.
Okay.
And so you can, one of the popular ones was Lucid Motors. So when all the frenzy around Tesla was occurring, it's like, oh, here's Lucid Motors.
Right.
One of it's going to be the next big thing. Same guy that was at Tesla. And you can get it for $10 a share. And so that one was, I remember that one really well because that one had a lot of frenzy around it from some of the Reddit groups. They were very excited for it to come out. But SPACs are an interesting vehicle. I consider that to be an innovation with how capital is raised, where if you can't go the traditional IPO route, you can now use a SPAC to do it. Do you, in the future, how do you see that market playing out? Do you feel that there's still a lot of opportunity for it, or do you think it's just kind of died down?
Well, I think it's going through a period of contraction for sure, and but it's you mentioned SPACs are innovation, but they have been around for quite a long time, and then they've had other cycles before. So obviously they've survived, ups and downs of the markets. The regulatory authorities have still think they're a valid instrument to use. So, these things ebb and flow, and I think SPACs are like I said, are a tool that investors will continue to maintain as part of a number of tools that they can to raise capital for companies, take companies public, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So, which sectors have you really excited for the future besides power and energy?
Private credit is a very active sector in Asia right now. As just one example. I'm kind of excited. I'm very excited about our agricultural transactions that we're doing. What else am I excited about? I'm really do a lot in energy and agriculture and infrastructure, so I'm most excited about those things. We have a very interesting geothermal company in the Philippines that I'm involved with. That's doing some additional geothermal power. There are various things like data center businesses, and some of those are we've seen some technology recently where you have a hydrogen powered data center, for example, that you have to co-locate to where the hydrogen output is coming from because of transport issues, but maybe eventually technology will solve that. And that's really interesting as an alternative way to have a cleaner power source, or data centers next to nuclear or geothermal, for example. I'm very excited when we see an opportunity for a Canadian company to bring their expertise out to Asia, which can be a technology transfer or a shift in the nexus of their operations that brings value to both parties. And I'm even more interested to see it come the other way, because I mentioned earlier, sometimes we think here in Canada that we are the center of the universe, and we're not. And innovation happens everywhere, and we can learn from how emerging market countries do and adapt and learn things just as they can learn from us, right? And hopefully with the Canada ASEAN Business Council, we are facilitating some of that knowledge and experience transfer.
Right. You mentioned infrastructure. And I feel in Canada, we're sort of in a time and place where we are struggling with our infrastructure, be it our housing supply, our some of our older buildings, our roads. How can we improve? Like, if, for instance, we're in downtown Toronto, and if we go outside, we can see that there's a lot of issues with some of the infrastructure that we have. Based on the lessons from Asia and how they're able to, again, move very quickly and be very efficient, what are some things that we can learn from them to help solve some of the current issues that we're facing?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of the infrastructure in quite probably the majority of it in emerging market countries, whether it's power generation or toll roads or airports, is private sector led and financed versus the government doing everything. And that could be out of necessity because the governments don't have all the capital to do everything. But there are various schemes like public-private partnerships or build, operate, transfer schemes or simple joint ventures or that can occur. And I think that's enabled some of this to advance quicker because of it's given access to a broader pool of capital. I think the other is just understanding the urgency and the requirements of building some of this infrastructure, both for business, but also for human need or the needs of your citizens. Unfortunately, Canada is looked at as a very difficult place to invest into infrastructure. We can't get critical projects done quickly, and that may be for genuinely good intentions in terms of environmental reviews and indigenous reconciliation and impact studies, for example. But you often have these things done in triplicate or quadruplicate. You've got the province, the federal government, the municipality, and it ends up taking you 10, 15 years to do something, right? And that isn't sustainable if we want to have a functioning country, and not just an economy, but a country. Similar with, mining, for example, that we have all the mining assets in this country to power, electronic vehicles and provide the resources for these shifts in power. But it takes 15 to 20 years to get a mine permitted in the country. Now that has been recognized by governments and industry and people, and there is a move to work on shortening those timelines to get these down to a more appropriate level of time, and to reduce some of the duplication in the processes. But it's going to take some time for that to get fixed. But that is something that needs to get addressed for sure. And the traffic here in downtown Toronto is terrible, as you mentioned. But it is in Vancouver. It is in everywhere else, right? And also the ability to trade. We're constrained by our port locations, like out west, Vancouver. It's in the middle of the city, right? For example, and so we need to look at our trading infrastructure as well to make sure that it can accommodate the growth that we're looking to build. And if it needs investment, then that investment needs to be done.
We definitely need to figure out a way to become more efficient, because it, as you mentioned, in downtown Toronto, we do have a lot of traffic issues. In fact, one of my previous guests, when he came on, he shared that there had been a study that was recently done, and Toronto was rated as number 1 when it comes towards traffic in North America. So we definitely have things to work on. But to your point, there seems to be a lot of these regulatory layers that are causing a slowdown. And there is good intent behind them, of course. And we should respect the different things that they're trying to accomplish. But again, I feel that we need to find a balance and figure out a way to get things done more quickly, particularly because the housing crisis in Canada is a real thing. Mm-hmm. And it's been very unfortunate. And of course, there's an affordability crisis that comes along with it. And so how do we improve to ensure that the younger generations do get a fair chance as well? Because right now it doesn't feel that way, which is not right. So there's a lot of work that for sure needs to be done in Canada. But I do feel, to your point, that there are other geographies, so we're doing things quite well. And so my hope is that we do look towards them and we learn from them, and hopefully we sort of take the best of these various mythologies that are out there and improve the lives of Canadians. So besides the issues in Toronto, putting those aside, what has you hopeful for Canada besides agriculture and our energy? Like, when you come here, is there anything you see that makes you go, oh, you know what, this is actually really interesting. I feel like this is going to do really well in the future, or this is going to be very good for the country?
Well, I think what still gives me hope about Canada is that we do have all the pieces of the puzzle here. I've been touring across the country from time to time. What's been fascinating is how great the talent we have in research at our universities. We're not very good at commercializing that research as compared to the U.S. and other countries, but I go in and we've met different folks doing different things in life sciences and energy and agriculture. I'm going to repeat that again, but in life sciences and others, and it's incredible the innovation that they are actually doing. But we remain a bit, isolated, that some of the universities aren't necessarily well connected with each other, unless a professor knows a professor over here and they're working together, because there's no a lack of coordination in different provinces and different cities about what each other is doing. And perhaps, given we do have limited resources, that a way of making that more efficient and collaborative would be a way to go. But we've got incredibly talented people in the country of all experiences, many cultures, that should have us set up to trade around the world, because we have people from around the world that understand those cultures and nuances. And I think we are doing that in many cases. And yeah, so I mean, I think Canada, we are in North America. We are a modern Western democratic society, but we're also not American, which in many parts of the world helps with some of the geopolitical issues that we mentioned. That we are seen as a good actor, maybe a diminishing one, but a good partner to potentially work with, and that who needs allies. And so I think that if you take all of those things, I think it still gives me quite a bit of hope that Canada can continue to be even better, prosperous society and work its way out of some of these issues that you mentioned. But they're not unique to Canada as well. I mean, the COVID and other things have impacted many countries around the world. Maybe not necessarily in the same way, but they are unique challenges to Canada in that respect. Right.
Like you mentioned agriculture again, so let's touch on that because we discussed energy a bit.
Sure.
But what do you see in agriculture in Canada, besides I suppose are like ample farmlands that you feel is great for the future and that we can help Asia and other economies in the world with things like food scarcity?
Well, I think that we're blessed with tremendous agricultural resources in this country that are very efficient, operate at high scale, have great use of technology in terms of drone monitoring for fertilizer, crops, harvesting, and we're already some of the biggest exporters of certain goods to countries like India and in Asia, and we could do more. And as I mentioned, countries looking as to who they want to partner with, Canada on this front comes up, quite dramatically as a choice. And so hopefully the free trade agreements that we're working on and some of the other dialogue and through the Indo-Pacific strategy, the federal government has recognized that as well. They've set up a new office at the High Commission in Manila for Agricultural Canada to be the Indo-Pacific office for agribusiness, agri-food, to help Canadian agribusiness get more into those markets and deal with things like regulations around importing and hygiene and standards and food safety and all of those different things, and logistics and helping to promote what we can. And in some cases it's working. In Singapore, when I go to the grocery store, I'm buying Canadian pork. It's fantastic. Just as one example. So, I mean, there's a lot more ways to go to grow that in that part of the world, whether it's grains or beef products, seafood products, and or more value-added agri-food type of commodities. And of course, we're blessed to have one of the biggest concentrations of one of the main agricultural fertilizers in this country in terms of potash. So not only are we exporting our own goods, we're helping these countries grow their own domestic food staples in a more positive or a better way. So we're a partner on a couple of fronts in that respect.
Oh my goodness, excuse me. For sure, Canada's have a lot going on in agriculture, and I feel, to your point, there is a lot that we are doing and that we can do to help other countries, because food scarcity is becoming a very real thing. It's unfortunate, and so it's wonderful that we have the pieces to potentially help solve that problem for the regions.
And food scarcity is one thing. It's from time to time, but it in many ways the world can feed itself. But it's also about availability or having that food in the right place, and that goes back to logistics, supply chain, shipping, trade agreements, and a lot of that stuff was impacted during COVID, and for example the conflict in Ukraine, which is also a natural breadbasket and a big exporter of grains and fertilizers and other things, and that's been a bit patchy since the conflict began, and particularly for some countries around the world that used to rely on them, they're forced to find other partners, and we can fill some of that gap here in Canada, and that's happening in a realignment that's going on.
Great. Let's speak a bit about the supply chains, because that was one of the, I suppose, main themes of COVID was supply chain disruption. So given your proximity to Asia and the fact that we import so much from there, and so people saw their lives disrupted quite dramatically, everything from like things like everyday essentials, basic needs. So how, I suppose that the question is like, how has it improved, or like what lessons have we learned from that to ensure that it doesn't happen again or not as dramatically? Because I feel that there have been different things that have been implemented to ensure that like we don't get that type of chaos again. So what have you seen? What have we done?
Sure. Well, I think there's a few things that have happened. So there's a recognition of perhaps of some what might be critical industries or critical things that perhaps need to be encouraged to come back to be made in our respective home countries, right? Maybe not 100%, but maybe enough to have as a backup or contribute a percentage of those goods. There are some geopolitical issues also driving that as well. I think looking at how you manufacture, and everybody was going to a just-in-time type of structure where you kept minimal inventory. Things arrived, went into finished good, and off it went. So those in manufacturing often have more stockpiles of parts than they perhaps were carrying before. And that has financial implications of having capital tied up in inventory. But I was at a factory in Manitoba where they make again an ag theme. They make tractors, and they had a bunch of tractors almost 90% ready, finished for delivery, but they were missing an aircon filter or a screw for something, and they were waiting to get it because it's been disrupted. So that people are looking at how they organize their manufacturing and managing that in different ways. And then going back to what I said about looking at where for those things that you will remain to be buying from abroad, who are the people that supply those, and should we have some greater diversification in those suppliers? And are some of them more friendly and share more of our values perhaps than others, and should we trade more with those? And so there's a realignment going on in many areas, and you see governments with their industrial policies all over are working to, particularly for what are deemed as critical industries, and not every country has the same criteria or policy, that there's encouragement by use of these industrialist processes to help pull some of that activity back to home markets. Yeah, I feel that it's good that we are getting some more onshore and business back, because while offshore was great and it helped us accomplish certain things, it wasn't great in times of turmoil, as we observed. So for us to be somewhat self-sufficient, I feel is important. And so I'm glad that was recognized and we are moving in the right direction. Given all that you do, and you're involved in so many of these very interesting projects, sort of all over the world, because you do travel a lot, I suppose if there's others out there who aspire to have a similar life, a similar role, maybe perhaps they want to go into private equity, they want to help with different funds, what would your advice be? Wow. Well, I mean, I think that, obviously you need to pick the path that you want to go down and focus on that. But, a little bit of serendipitous activity, also a little bit of luck goes a long way, no matter how much planning and organization you do. But I guess I would say, keep an open mind. You can learn from emerging markets as well as developed markets. Draw on your strengths, maybe from a cultural diaspora background, right? To look at what's happening in other markets that you have a connect with. Don't be afraid to take some risk in exploring. I feel that risk appetite has certainly decreased in Canada, whether it's from a business perspective or a personal one for that matter. And maybe, as you suggested, people need to get out of their houses a little bit more and and away from their computer and actually interact personally, and because that drives exchange of ideas and that you can act on and go forward. But we're blessed here with a strong education system, great connectivity to the planet, a very diverse population that probably, if you looking into a certain topic or matter and start talking to people, you probably quickly find that leads down a number of avenues that can help you in your quest. And I guess, don't be afraid to ask, whether it's for assistance or for advice, or to tap any of the private sector organizations and or government organizations that are out there to assist people with business and developing business in their careers. There's actually quite a lot out there.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I feel that the risk piece is definitely valuable because at some point you have to venture, right? If you don't venture out, there's no gain. So this has been a very insightful conversation. I've learned a lot, and there's a lot for me to think about now. And I don't think I've ever been this excited about agriculture before. So
there you go. Who knew?
Yes. So I'm definitely going to go and look into agriculture because it seems like there's a lot of interesting things happening there. So Wayne, thank you for coming in. I greatly enjoyed this. No,
thank you for having me. It was fun. Let me know when you want me the next time.
We'll definitely arrange for a next time.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share, like, and subscribe, and we will see you at the next one.